Hey, parents and birth pros, welcome back to our summit where we are talking with people who actually trust birth. I'm Meredith Nelson, and today I have Blyss Young, midwife Blyss Young, joining me. Blyss is a certified professional midwife in California. She's a birth entrepreneur. She has done so many incredible things with her life. Even before she was a midwife, actually, she owned a freestanding birth center. If I'm right, it was at the time the only freestanding birth center in Los Angeles. Is that right, Blyss?
Yep, that's correct.
So I want to start. I'm just curious about your path, Bliss. Have you always had a relationship with birth that made it an obvious choice for you to be a home birth midwife, or what was your journey to where you are?
No, not at all. Not at all. And my path meandered quite a bit. And I'm actually not in LA anymore. I left LA last summer. And right now, currently, I'm practicing in Santa Barbara, California.
Okay,
But
cool.
I am a native to Los Angeles and was there for 4 generations. So my roots are definitely in LA. And that is where I birthed my children and definitely decided to become a midwife, but made the decision and leap to leave last summer. So where did it start? I really believe, like when I look back on the path, I really believe it started at the birth of my niece. So I was 13 years old and my sister was delivering with midwives, and we didn't talk a lot about it during that time, but I have this vivid memory of her laboring at the birth center, and then it was time for the baby to come, and I sat at the foot of the bed and I watched my niece emerge, and I thought it was the most miraculous thing I had ever seen. And it imprinted on me, but I don't think it was like one of those moments where like other midwives are
Be
like,
midwife. Yeah.
yeah, I always knew that this was going to be what I was meant to do. I just thought it was incredible. And then, many, many years later, I got pregnant myself, and I did what most people do when they get pregnant in the States is I checked my insurance and I went to the OB. That was part of my plan. And I didn't even really think about having to look for midwives or choose midwives. It just wasn't even a thought. But halfway through my pregnancy, I started to get curious about why my care was looking so different from what I had witnessed with my sister. And so I am really going to date myself. But back then, you looked in the yellow pages. There was no internet, there was none of that, no Instagram. And I found the local birth center, and I went and I switched my care over and I started working with a group of midwives in Glendale, California. And, when it came time for my birth, I was young, I was only 20. And I just trusted that birth just works, and I never considered that I would be one of those people who would end up at the hospital. But I was, and it wasn't an emergency, but I had had a long labor, as often happens with first time moms, and I had pushed for 6 hours. And at a certain point, my midwife felt like she had tried everything and said, I think we need a change. I think we need to try something different. And so I said, okay, great, let's go. And at the hospital, I had a lot of interventions. I was needed, obviously. But I had a forceps delivery and episiotomy and epidural. I was separated from my baby for many hours. And, back then I didn't really understand. But now that, again, that I'm looking back at my path, I realized that was a really important point for me in understanding the difference between midwifery care, out of hospital, community-based birth, and what a woman might experience in the hospital. And I think that was really important for me in working with women. I went on to, the midwife that I worked with at that point had said to me, I think your pelvis is abnormal and that you'll never be able to deliver out of the hospital. And so for many, many years, I believed that my body was broken and I was going to have another hospital delivery. And my paths crossed with a midwife. And I talked to her about this and said, what do you think? And she said, well, your pelvis is already tried, meaning that the baby had already passed through, unlike, someone who had had a cesarean. And I think you can have a trial of labor. And if you need to go to the hospital, then go to the hospital. And so I had a beautiful, triumphant home birth with my daughter in front of the Christmas tree. It was a 2.5 hour labor. I pushed for like 20 minutes. And it was this fortifying moment of like how transformative this experience can be for women. It's not just something to survive. It's not just, a medical event. It is an experience that women have the opportunity and privilege to be able to experience. And so I became an advocate for midwifery and talked a lot about my experiences with other women and really wanted midwifery to become mainstream, but I still didn't think that it was going to be my profession, nor did I believe that I was the midwife.
Yeah.
And so I worked with these midwives for a long time. They owned the Hollywood Birth Center, and I did some work with them in their office because my background is more like administrative and customer service and stuff like that. And so then when their birth center closed and they decided that they wanted to start a new practice, they asked me if I would come and manage their practice. And I said, it's crazy that Los Angeles, as big as it is, doesn't have a birth center. So I'd be happy to come and work with you. But my vision is that we create a birth center. And what we created was one of a kind birth center. It was an integrative birth center that worked with Dr. Stuart Fishbein. So we had an OB on our team. So we did ultrasounds. We had acupuncturists and a team of midwives and breastfeeding and an eco boutique and a yoga studio. And I could just go on and on. It was this huge, massive project. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, I can't believe that we made that happen. It was just pretty incredible. And it was open for 9 years. And during that time, there were a lot of new midwives that came to work for us because we had a very big group. And I noticed that we weren't caring for the families in the way that I had been cared for, like the traditional model that I was so in love with. It was starting to become much more medicalized. We were doing more tests. We were doing things that I just didn't understand, like sweeping women's membranes and doing dilation checks, before labor. And so I started to push back, but I didn't have a license. I was just the owner. And so these midwives were like, you don't really understand. You're not a midwife. And so that actually was the motivation for me to get my license, because I had such a passion for this work. And I was starting to feel like I didn't understand the direction that it was going. And it was really important for me to have a voice inside of what was happening. And so, the first time I caught a baby, I was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing in the world. I can't believe I waited so long. And there are many other people who have known me for a long time who are like, we always knew you were going to be a midwife. It was just a matter of time. So now here I am. Many years later, and I can't imagine that I questioned it at any point, but that was a long answer to your question.
It's so amazing because you had so much experience before you ever had experience as a midwife. So
Yeah,
it's almost like you jumped into this second life having already had this former life that was just so centered around birth.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so even among home birth midwives, there's a really large range, as you alluded to, in terms of modes of practice and different approaches to management, different ways of being as midwives. So how would you identify your kind of guiding philosophy as a midwife?
It's interesting because, every time I try and find like a term that I really feel like I fit under, there's controversy or conflict. And I'm sure we know in this modern world, like words are very important. And there's a lot of energy around different words that you kind of associate yourself with. So it's hard for me to pick one. But I would definitely say that I'm a spiritual midwife. And I would definitely say that my leaning is more towards the traditional models than what we would call a midwife, or a more medical slant. So that to me speaks more to my heart of why I love this work and why I got into this work. And we as midwives say there's a midwife for everybody. So I really believe that we just need to be really informed about the type of midwife that you're desiring and the type of experience that you're desiring so that you can find the right fit for you. And in some ways I do wish that we had some subcategories in the language and the vernacular so that you would be really clear, like, I am looking for, and I think it's happening, I am looking for a traditional midwife. I am looking for a spiritual midwife. I'm looking for a Christian based midwife, and so that we understand that there is a distinction and that just because we have that title midwife does not necessarily mean that we practice in the same way or have the same beliefs.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious if there was a birth or a client that particularly, um, I don't know, guided your thinking or changed your way of practicing as a midwife or made you want to be a more spiritual, traditional midwife.
I don't think it was a client. I think it's my journey. I think it's my history and the path that I've walked. And if we look at traditional midwifery, we lived in a more kind of village type organization, and the midwives were the wise women. They were the women who had lived a lot of life and could come from that perspective of being able to hold space for the arc of life and death and loss and birth and beauty. And we were the medicine women, and we understood the herbs, and I think that to me, when I think about midwifery, I think about these wise women, and it's become a profession, and it's become, something that younger women are getting into, which is totally fine. I just think that there's something available when you have somebody who has lived a lot of life and has been through experiences that have taken them on a path. And midwifery for me is not just delivering babies or catching babies or doing prenatal care. It really is about supporting women through all of the stages of life and supporting their family, and being someone that people can turn to when they need support.
So just maybe to paint a picture for viewers who've never even thought about, what is a traditional midwife? What does she do?
Mhm.
Is there a story that you could share that demonstrates like how you function with a client under this model of traditional midwifery, or how another traditional midwife would do it?
Well, I can really only speak to myself, but if we, because we are a combination, right? We have to also be able to integrate. Like in my dream, we could go back to that kind of lifestyle where we were so connected to the earth and really respected the earth, and we were integrated with those ways. But we have to realize that we're coming from a more modern perspective. And one of the things that when I very first started practicing as a midwife, I really wanted to hold this space for my clients where I felt like I could put them in this beautiful bubble and they would be able to really enjoy the beauty and of being pregnant, and not have so much concern and fear. And that happened for me because when we went to get information when I was pregnant, we would get it from our friends and family, my midwife, or you'd have to go to the library to like read a book, and what I realized after practicing for many years and having so many women who wanted an out of hospital birth, wanted a community based birth, wanted to work with midwives, wanted holistic care, but they were coming with so much fear still. And I realized like it's different. You guys are living in an age where we're constantly inundated with information, and people have access to you 24/7, and there's no way to put clients in a bubble anymore the way that I really dreamed about doing. So you have to be able to meld both worlds. So I am a midwife who carries a license. I do carry medications. I do know the more Western medicine ways of managing complications, but I also am a woman and a healer and a midwife who believes that there is a divine intervention that's happening. I do believe that when I walk into a birth, that I'm not coming from bliss with a cognitive functioning brain that's thinking about what's happening. I come into a room believing that I'm a conduit for spirit, and that my hands are guided and my ways are guided through a divine connection. So not everybody will resonate with that. Not everybody feels that way. But we do talk about mind, body, and spirit, and that they are all integrated. And so I'm always looking at something from what does nature intend in this situation? How are our interventions actually a detriment to what is happening, either physiologically or emotionally for this woman? I really do believe that when we intervene in the process, there's a ripple effect, right? So that can cause more complications. But I also believe that I'm taking something from that woman in terms of the empowerment of what was it like when you actually found the strength and understood your own instincts and your body, and were able to lead the way of what was happening during your labor and pregnancy. And how all of these things, the information and the documents that people sign, and how does that take something from her, and what can I do in this modern world to try and give that back, to help her see that again, to connect again with her intuition, and to have that transformative experience that I talked about, that is our birthright. What happens when a woman is really able to totally trust what's happening and feel into it and guide the process, rather than turning that power over to someone else and being guided. And then who does she become in her family, in the world? This isn't just about birth for me. This is about what happens when women are in their power. What would happen in our communities and in our culture if women felt empowered and transformed and strong? And so that is what I feel like I get to guide women through, or families through. And that's very different than something to survive.
That's amazing, Blyss. Just the way you talk about that, I can tell that you really do it well.
Thank
I'm,
you.
I'm curious what, maybe it's hard to boil down because I'm sure it's really individual. Every woman who comes to you is coming with her own history and her own beliefs about birth and about her body. But like, what are the concrete things you do to help them feel like kind of disconnect themselves from the fear paradigm and connect themselves to their internal power that you were describing?
Yeah, it is very individualized. And it can look like, for some women, talking to them about food and how they relate to food, and how, if they are connected to how the food makes them feel, and how are they going to feed their families once they have children. I mean, it can be something as simple as that, or talking to them about different herbs and stuff that they can use in their food, or where the nutrient comes from, so they start to understand that they now are going to be the medicine women for their family. It could be something like that, or it could be a conversation about family history. It could be breaking the generational traumas from their family. It could be, a sexual trauma or an abortion that they're needing to overcome. It could be how they feel about their body. What's their relationship like? What were their past birth experiences like? How would they like for that to be different this time? And it's a slow unraveling of, that's why it's so beautiful to have months and months to work together. And it takes some time to be able to find what is that point for her that feels really important. And some women come to me and they know, I want to have a transformative experience. And I'm like, what would that look like for you? What would be kind of your goals, so to speak, that would make it feel that way? And then we start to pull that apart. And some people have no idea why they've come into my care. They just are drawn to something, they're just like, when I look at you or I read your words on your website, something gets ignited in me. And I've never to this day, although I'm not saying I wouldn't, I haven't turned a client away. I mean, I take time off, so sometimes I say I'm not available because of the timing, but I haven't like looked at a client and said, we're not a good fit. I've told people my concerns about like, maybe I'm not the right person for you. And then they talk me back into it. But I believe that if we come together, if there's that soul recognition, that there's a reason why we're going to be working with them to help them find these places in themselves where maybe no one gave them permission to talk about those things, or they don't feel safe enough to talk about those things. So a lot of it is dialogue in terms of prenatal care. And then in the birth space, it really is about energy and touch and presence. And those are not something that you can boil down to a few words. That's something that it's a process that evolves over time. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, so is it those things that are being lost, Bliss, this like the soul connection and this kind of holistic look at the woman's life that are missing or from modern midwifery or a lot of modern just care practices?
I believe that the soul connection, the divine, the spirit, bringing in the spirit aspect is lost from a lot of midwifery practices. Not all, but I feel like, and there's such an emphasis on the medical perspective, the Western medical perspective, that a lot of times I feel like what we're learning in our MEC accredited education and in our apprenticeship, in the apprenticeship model that we have now, we're learning a lot more about defensive charting, how like about the medications, and it gets more and more complex all the time. We have more devices that we're supposed to carry. We have more procedures that we're supposed to do in order to be professional and appropriate. And a lot of those conversations are happening amongst the midwifery groups, and also looking to ACOG, which is a profession for gynecologists and obstetricians, and their protocols to be able to guide what we should be doing. And it's like saying, if someone is having digestive issues, there's a Western medical way of looking at that, and then there's like Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine. So just Western medicine and allopathic medicine is not the only way to look at who we are as healthy individuals in this world, right? There's lots of different perspectives. And I think that birth is getting boiled down to this Western medicine perspective. And the problem is that our statistics are terrible. So people have felt like, okay, well, we've advanced and we have medicine and we have all these things to keep women safe. That would be great if the statistics were actually reflecting that. But they're not. And that's just talking about the basics of maternal and infant mortality and morbidity. So that's like baseline. Did we survive and were we injured, right? But what about what I was just pointing to? What about the transformation of a woman? What about her satisfaction in the process? What about her not being traumatized from the experience? What about those things as being important in this process, not just to survive the experience, but about our culture and our families actually, and our women, our birthing people actually thriving through this experience and growing. Traditionally, in a lot of cultures, we have these rites of passage where you go from being a girl to a woman to a mother, right? And they're acknowledged. The sacredness of that is acknowledged so that she can step into these roles and feel supported by her family and her community. We just are so lacking of any acknowledgement of the sanctity of this experience. And And so I do feel like that is severely lacking. And I feel like we're missing so much from not acknowledging that and integrating that. And if midwives are afraid, or if doctors are afraid of birth, then how can they help these families not be afraid of birth? And you know, we're mammals. We're meant to deliver our babies. Like, this is a natural physiologic process, like digesting your food and eating and having sex and orgasm. It's like, you know, it's the animal part of who we are, and we just keep disconnecting from that more and more and more. And that would be great if we were thriving, but as a culture and a community, we're not. And I think that we all know that deep in our heart, that there's something missing. And this is the beginning of bringing a soul into the world. So why not start here?
Yeah. That's beautiful, Blyss. So you've been recently working on a new project to try and keep traditional midwifery knowledge and wisdom alive. And I would love for you to describe that and just tell me about where it is and what your goals are with it.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's grown so much in the last year. You know, I think it goes back to my desire to, as we were talking about, like, figure out like the vernacular and how different midwives really are. And I thought about that a lot, and I thought about, like, how could I create something that would help people figure this out. And what I'm really realizing is that I feel really pulled towards traditional midwifery, as we've discussed today. And there's not a lot of opportunities through our traditional way, or you know, the way that it's been laid out for us to get our license and our education. So historically, midwives would sit at the feet of an elder, and she would ask for an apprenticeship, basically, and she would sit and listen to her stories and watch and learn over years of time until that midwife felt, or she felt, that she was really ready to be able to kind of take over practicing, or that midwife passed on, and then it was just a natural organic process that the women who learned from her would be the ones to take over. And so when I went to school, I was looking for these traditional midwives to be passing down this knowledge to me, and there was very little of that available to me. And before 2020, and you know, the world changed with COVID and traveling and all of that, I really believed that I was gonna, you know, put my Doppler in my backpack and get on some planes and just like go find those opportunities. And things shifted, and so the way that I was thinking about it shifted, and you know, so much went online. And I thought, you know, how do we capture this wisdom from these women that are getting older? Some of them are losing their cognitive ability. Some of them are going to pass on, you know? And so it's like it's a wisdom, a body of knowledge that could become extinct, like languages and animals that are becoming extinct. And I think that would be a real shame not to learn what they know. And so I gathered a group of midwives, and we're creating an organization called the Bridge Midwives. And the intention is to be the bridge between these elder midwives and the newer generation of midwives that are coming up. And again, not everybody's going to be called to this, but there are a lot of midwives that I talk to that are longing for that depth and for that knowledge. And so we're intending to do that. And so the genesis, the original thought behind it, was to create these beautiful modules that would be beautifully cinematography and give you the feeling of what it would be like to sit at this woman's feet. So what her life is like, what the colors are like in her culture, and the foods and the people and all of that. Because you know, there's something different about just listening to someone talk, like the talking head. You know, you get information and that's great, but how do you create an experience? And I'm a film lover, by the way. Like, I grew up just loving films, and so I was like, how do you create that kind of experience, like, you know, where you feel like you're there? And so that's the objective, is to find these midwives that are interested in passing down their wisdom and create these beautiful modules that will be up on our website. and all of the proceeds of you would download them and pay for them. And then the money that comes from that would go directly to that midwife. Another aspect of it is that we will have a directory of traditional midwives and what they're up to. Are they practicing? Do they have products that they're selling? Have they written books? Are they teaching? Where are they in the world? And so that if you're interested in learning more or getting information about her work, you can find that. And then there'll also be a podcast called At Her Feet, which I will be the host, and we'll travel to midwives and do, hour and a half conversation with those midwives that maybe they don't want to participate at that other level where we're filming them and spending lots and lots of time with them, but they are interested in maybe, talking about some of the gems in their hearts that they want to give away before they let go. And then not lastly, and then also doing a ceremony for the midwives that have worked and have given their hearts and their souls and their time for, decades to this work, to do ceremony and to honor them as they decide to retire, which I don't really love that word, but, I think this modern culture will understand that term. And then there'll be opportunities for young midwives to be able to get access to this information and opportunities, having peer review with traditional midwives so that, if you practice in a way that's similar to what I was talking about, you have a safe space to be able to talk about that and exchange ideas. So it's growing. There's lots and lots of aspects to this, but we are so excited to be launching our website very soon and getting donations so that we can go out and start to do these interviews and get to spend time with these midwives and bring that information back so that we can benefit from it.
What an incredible gift, honestly, like to humanity, that you are capturing this. Before, as you said, so many of these midwives are quite old now, and we're going to lose a lot as they pass on and leave their practices. We will be linking to the Bridge Midwives below, so you can visit them and donate to their cause or see what they're up to, partake of these amazing offerings. Blyss, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and for taking the bold move of becoming a midwife after one or two other careers because you felt called to it, and for following that calling. Thank you all for viewing. Thank you, Blyss, for being here, and we'll see you all next time.